have 2 questions at a time. Anyone else? Questions?
Come on, he doesn't bite. Come on, guys.
There's 2.
Okay, I was just wondering, when you were talking earlier about over-regulation, so it's hard to make mistakes, I was thinking about the question of surrogacy, which we've had for many years now. And surrogacy has posed many problems for people. There have been awful kind of court cases where either the surrogate wants to keep the baby, or the parents who've sort of ordered the baby don't want it, or they're fighting between them to keep the baby. And I think, is there any way in which regulation could be more effective, or could be more effective? Because it carries on these ethical problems with surrogacy.
Yeah. You can hear on the far side, yeah? Surrogacy. Do you know, I have real problems with surrogacy because I feel for some women who get pregnant with a baby, you know, there's a kind of bonding procedure which is very, very important. And of course we now know that that bearing mother has more influence than we previously thought on the development of the baby because of epigenetics. So I'm unclear how you should handle it, and I think I was the first person in Britain to do a surrogacy IVF procedure. It was a long time ago, way back, before anybody started doing it. And I realized at the time that this was fraught with risk because of those relationships and the fact that the bearing mother might want to take the baby back and so on. And I still am dubious about surrogacy. The current relationship is that commercial surrogacy is not allowed in Britain, so you can't pair a surrogate. But even that seems unwise because after all that woman is taking at least 6 months out, you know, maternity leave and so on, to do what is a very altruistic action. I don't know how we should handle it better. It seems to me that you cannot legislate or impose a legal restriction on something which is so emotional, where there are personal things going on. And it seems to me that if a mother bears a baby which is at least her genetic baby, no matter what document she signed, it seems extraordinarily cruel to enforce a surrogacy arrangement. I don't honestly know how you handle it, and I've puzzled and wondered about that for a long time. And after that first surrogacy arrangement, which I did way back in the early 1980s, I stopped doing them because I didn't feel comfortable with the idea of continuing it. Other people took it on, but I still feel unnerved by the notion that somebody might give up a baby which she's brought up within her, with her own egg particularly. Even with a donor egg, it's tricky, but with her own egg, it's even more hard. And I have great misgivings about it. Does that answer the question? It probably doesn't. How do you regulate it? The answer is I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it can be regulated. As you say, you can't
Yes,
regulate human emotions.
I agree.
And maybe it's important that people who are thinking about doing it consider the problems that can follow and be really clear in their own minds about which way they're going to go.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't tell, you know, after 9 months you're going to feel necessarily quite different.
Well, I agree with that, and I think actually the difference between the American civilization and the British civilization is quite striking here. In Britain, we don't feel we can, if you like, regulate by law. In the United States, it's quite black and white. You've signed an agreement, therefore it's enforceable. And that's the end of the story. So women are giving up a baby, and they don't have any right, because it's enshrined by that document that they've signed. To my mind, that is quite heartless, and I'm troubled by it.
Shall we go for another one?
Second question.
I was just interested in the way that we've kind of you talked through a number of things, and
Sorry, where are you?
You've talked through a number of things, and you've kind of, I don't know, maybe not ranked them, but talked about their importance in various kind of ways. I was just wondering what you would count the most important thing that you've done, maybe scientifically, maybe not.
It's cheesy.
Yeah.
It's very cheesy. No, it's bloody obvious. I mean, I say this absolute sincerity. It's why I have 3 children.
Yeah, I thought that's right.
I mean, it's a cheesy answer. Because actually, you know, I look at them and I'm proud of, you know, 3 kids who've gone to different British universities and done well, and are absolutely, you know, I think, you know, responsible people doing different jobs. And I don't think one should do more than that. I suppose if you ask me what I think now is the most important thing I do, it's probably doing what I do every week, which is going into schools, talking to primary school children, you know, somebody towards the end of my sort of useful life. So I mean, today in Sheffield, I talked to 2,000 school children just doing GCSE in the City Hall. That seems to me to be quite important. If you can give them some taste, some reason why they might want to go to university, some kind of ambition. You know, we're not very good in schools. Sorry, you'll take it. Give them some, what's the word I want? You know, we're living in a society where aspiration is so devoid in so many parts of our society because of poverty, because of lack of opportunity. So if we can actually try and persuade people that they all have that brain with 100 billion neurons, that actually it's a question of really wanting to get interested, wanting to get involved, to my mind that's really important. So I think in a way that's what I try to do most important. So the outreach we do, you know, at the university and the stuff I do in schools is probably the most important thing I'm doing now. Scientifically, I don't know, it's for other people to judge. You know, there are 3, what is it, you said 300 papers? Something like that, you know, but, you know, they're all crap. I mean, really, when you look at it, okay, some of them have got quite a high impact factor. If you look at the impact factor overall, it's not bad. What does it mean? And it's very easy to get carried away with a sense of your own importance, and it's so important not to allow that to happen too often, because actually, you know, we're all pretty limited. And I think that one of the worst things that Nobel Prize winners do is to think they know everything. So when James Watson talks about intelligence and race, you know, he's just wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And it seems to me to be so counterproductive. And even, you know, when my colleagues signed the letter at the Times about the 3-parent families earlier, you know, Paul Nurse, who I love, he's a wonderful person, absolutely suitable for a Nobel Prize, a perfect president of the Royal Society. But you have to say, well, actually, his area is the cell cycle, and it's brilliant. But, you know, how does he know how families feel about mitochondrial disease? Why should he know? So I think we have to be a bit cautious. I'm not saying that he was wrong to sign that letter, I don't think he was. But, you know, I'm not sure we should take more notice of a Nobel Prize winner outside his field than a bus driver who's not actually following, you know, the road restrictions, but doing something else. You know, it's an interesting issue. So I think your question really covers a very wide area of human aspiration. I think it's very important we do try to encourage aspiration. I think it's very important we do recognise that we have limits.
I think we'll just have one more at least. Yeah.
I think you rightly identified that there should be an emphasis on science at primary school level, but how do you think,
what you said.
how do you handle any tensions that might arise from faith schools, which a lot of people see as a great tradition within the UK?
It's a very interesting question. It's a very interesting question indeed, and it's one where my view is constantly changing. I actually think that we would be very unwise on the whole to abandon faith schools at the moment, because actually so many of them are so much better than the general education that we give. You know, most of the church schools, most of the Catholic schools are bloody good schools. The Jewish schools at the moment are right at the top of the state sector. I think that that's really important, and some of the Muslim schools, you know, are increasing in their value. The trouble really is, how do we ensure, you know, a general view of the world, and how do we impose, if that's the right word, what we should expect as taxpayers in those schools which are making our citizens? You know what? I don't think it's an easy answer. And I don't have an answer. But I think we have to be more and more aware of the fact that faith schools may have real disadvantages in that aspect of how we look at the natural world around us. I think that most of the faith schools I've been in, which tend to be mostly Christian, either Catholic or Anglican, and a few Jewish, have been deeply impressive. But it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be on our way against the brainwashing that occurs in any school, which is a faith school. On the other hand, of course, we get brainwashing in non-faith schools as well. That's one of the problems. You know, you have a biology teacher. I mean, this is an amazing story. I was giving a talk the other day to 16-year-olds in an audience, and the biology teachers were in the audience, and there were a number of schools there. It was about a month ago, and this biology teacher came up to me afterwards, and he said, he was teaching A-level biology, and he said to me, tell me, he said, look, there's something really worrying me. He said, would you eat genetically modified crops? And I said, well, why not? He said, well, aren't they dangerous? He said, my wife and I think that they're dangerous. And I said, well, you know, the DNA that you ingest is DNA that you ingest with anything. Your stomach acids and your enzymes break that DNA out in its component parts, and it's quite irrelevant what you're eating. You can't incorporate that DNA in your own genome. And you know what he said? Are you sure? Now, this is a person teaching biology in a non-faith school. And to my mind, that's more serious. Because if he doesn't have that answer, you know, to questions that he's being asked at that level, it's not frightfully good for our educational system. So I think it happens at all levels, faith or non-faith. But of course, I accept your point about the faith school. I think it's a really interesting issue. And I'm not quite sure how we change that.
How about we just squeeze in one more question? I'm a little bit worried about time here.
There was a lady at the back, sorry,
Okay.
just before. Yeah, that one.
You only touched on this. You only touched on it really briefly.
It's very hard this is, isn't it?
Yeah, at the beginning you were talking about sort of the change in perceptions of truth in science.
Between
Perceptions of truth in science, and you're sort of there being no such thing as like a scientific truth, you know, it's just...
the scientific truth, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and you mentioned like phenomenology, and I was just wondering where that sort of link...
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
It's fascinating, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I tell you what, I was involved in a debate in Westminster Abbey a couple of months ago. In Westminster Abbey, there were three people speaking about truth. The subject was truth. And one of them was a very distinguished journalist, a foreign correspondent. And one was Jack Straw, an ex-Home Secretary, and one was me. Both the journalist and the politician said that they always told the truth. And when it came to my turn, I said to Jack Straw, I'm surprised, Jack, that you say that you told the truth. You were Home Secretary, which means you were in charge of MI5, MI6, Cheltenham, and you always told the truth? Yes, he said. I said, I don't believe you. And I said, I don't think scientists ever tell the truth because I'm not sure that they know what it is. It doesn't get us very much further. But to some extent, I think it's really interesting to consider how we perceive what is true one day and how we reconsider what is true at another time. You know, one of the people who most influenced my sort of general thinking in the theatre was Luigi Pirandello. Pirandello, in the early 20th century, around about the time of the First World War, was writing plays which looks at illusion and reality. He says, effectively, that when you're looking at a play, you know, you want to believe that you're looking at what's actually happening, but you're looking at an illusion. And actually it turns out that everything we perceive is an illusion. That actually our perception is illusory, and of course that's what phenomenology is saying to some extent. And I know, for example, when you look at meta-analysis of experiments done in the same kind of way in different laboratories, how often you get quite widely disparate results. So you have to build up a body of knowledge from a number of meta-analyses to get an overall medium to make some kind of informed judgment about whether that is probably right or probably wrong. And I think that's quite interesting. So I don't know how we deal with that as scientists, but I think what we have to be is very cautious. And of course, particularly today, you know, if you think about it, those scientists in Newcastle have pretty well persuaded everybody that it's absolutely true that what they've done is okay. Imagine what would happen if the child that they produce turns out to be horribly defective. Where is that truth now? So I think we have to recognize that there are limitations to our perception of what really is true and what really is provable and what really is an acceptable risk. It seems to me that those are margins which are always changing, and we have to be rather cautious about that assessment. Is that fair?
I think we really will just have one question and then we'll skip to the wine reception. Very sorry everyone. We're getting value for money here.
Newcastle United supporter.
You mentioned earlier about the nature-nurture debate, but I was just wondering where you stood on that with regard to gender, because in history there's been cases where people have been born as a biological sex but are raised successfully as a different sex, and also there's the other case where they're not and they have to go back to their biological sex because they can't live their life that way. I wonder where you stood on that.
It's a wonderful question. Today, no, it was yesterday, I was in the school where I was, and one of the people sending out said, "Do you remember this chap that you worked with 40 years ago in this hospital?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, he's now a she, he's retired." I think gender is a fascinating issue, and our attitude towards gender is very strange. We reinforce stereotypes. So, for example, one of the experiments we did at Child of Our Time was to take children of about 1.5 and dress them in blue if they were a girl and pink if they were a boy, and then we put them in a room with an adult who didn't know them and hand them to the adult where there were lots of toys scattered around. Of course, a 1.5-year-old, that's at the worst time when they're most disorientated by a foreign adult. They all cried. So what happened was that that person who was acting in loco parentis picked up a toy, and if it was somebody dressed in blue, they handed them a lorry, and if it was a girl, they handed them, if it was pink, they handed them a doll. It's very interesting. So our attitudes about gender are strange. But having said that, there is a difference in the wiring of the brain. We know, for example, that your brain, on average, will be 70 millilitres less in volume than your brain. It's bizarre. And the reason for that is because we males are not prepared to ask directions to where we're going. So thank you. But there are fundamental differences between men and women. Women are much better at communication, for example. They use neurons in a slightly different way. We don't understand that. Simon Baron-Cohen from Cambridge published a massive meta-analysis of a whole range of different studies that showed very clearly that there were gender issues which are different in the brain, which may lead to some justification for those stereotypes, but not completely. Now, I suppose that there must be some people with Gaussian variation who have a brain which is perhaps more feminine or masculine and do change or do feel differently. I mean, I feel myself, the reason why I went into my field was because I much prefer female patients. I find myself getting on better with women. I think there's a feminine side to the way I think. Now, whether that affects my sex life, I don't think it does, but you know, I think there are issues there which are really interesting that we don't really understand. And I think that there are some males I work with who are much more feminized, and some women who I think are incredibly masculinized, who I would find quite difficult to work with sometimes. And I think that that's interesting, but I don't know how we deal with those things which are other than stereotypical. I think we have to take people as we are, as they are and as we are. It worries me very much that in our society we're still not giving women a proper equality. And because our biology is different. You know, the fact is that women are losing eggs all the time, but men are making new sperm all the time. So we have to find ways of making sure that in a proper society we encourage much better recognition of the need for women in order to gain that skill, that experience, and to contribute in the same way as men, to actually have more time off, to encourage more men to be involved in childcare, to give much more money towards child rearing, which of course is very poorly supplied in Britain. And I'm quite proud of one thing, that in the science building where I work at Imperial, there are 12 professors, and there are 6 males who are professors and 6 females. And I feel that actually we've really come towards, in a rather male-dominated university, to try to see something close to equality. But we're a long way off that in our society. Denmark is better at it, for example, and many other societies are as well. But hopefully that will change. Getting women to freeze their eggs is sure as eggs not the way to do it. I mean, this crazy idea that you can allow a company like Apple, oh, this is my last word, a company like Apple to exploit women for their own personal interests, to try and improve their supply of employees. Really nice talking to you. I don't know why you've been so patient. It's very hot at the back. I don't know how you've managed it, so we probably ought to stop. But thank you.
Thank you very much.